recite the Pledge of Allegiance with me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The first item on our agenda is our weekly commission reports. Commissioner Moore.
I have no scheduled meetings this week. However, 3 days last week, I did attend an Infrastructure Assistance Coordinating Council conference in Wenatchee, which was very fruitful. I hope I met a lot of people. I met a lot of people that I had known in other roles in my life, so that was really fun. But it was very educational about different avenues and different partnerships we can pursue for getting funding for infrastructure and for community development, which I was very pleased that there were several tracks on historic preservation and community development and how important it is that we take advantage of every asset our community has and build on that. The other tracks that I took that were extremely valuable were creative problem solving, coming up with creative solutions and not doing things the same way just because that's the way we've always done it. Also, for potential for rebranding and re-looking at our identity and what we are now and what we want to be in the future. So I think that that will fit well with the Forterra project that we are planning to have done early next year. So that is my report.
All right. Commissioner Olson.
Tomorrow I have a law enforcement firefighters disability board meeting, and then as of last week and most of this week we're deep into the budget process. We got department heads presented last week, and then today we just spent the last 4 hours prioritizing requests, and on it goes. It's pretty intense.
Did that complete your report?
That completes my report.
Yes. This morning I was on the Hotel Motel Tax Board. We met at 8 o'clock, and then I went into a coalition call. So that's something we're in the process of doing, building a coalition of other cities that are facing the same infrastructure costs that we are, and so we're moving forward in a positive fashion on that. Tomorrow I will be attending an EDC economics subcommittee talking about regulations, government regulations and things like that. So then on Wednesday hopefully I'll be attending a county criminal justice task force meeting. I've been trying to keep up on that. They are entertaining the possibility of a levy shift, which we still, I think, are a little bit maybe not totally clear on exactly the possible economic consequences that might shed upon the city, and we want to make sure we're right up on that and continuing to monitor that and watch that and have our discussions, because at the moment we do not need any less money. We could use quite a bit more money. So we're just monitoring that activity. Thursday, it looks like I'll be having a Economic Development Council board meeting in the morning. At noon, I will be speaking at the Rotary, and afternoon I'll be doing coalition calls. On Friday, possibly more coalition calls. So that completes our commission reports. The next is a general public comment period. If anyone would like to speak, just sign in over there at that desk, and we'd love to hear from you. At this time, what we're going to do is recess out of our regular meeting and open a public hearing. And this public hearing is going to be talking about Mason County Shelter Crossroads Housing Relocation Project. And that will be presented to us by our Economic Development Director, Steve Goins.
Can you hear me now? I have a brief presentation tonight. This public hearing is part of a closure process for our Community Development Block Grant funding that we received in actually 2012 to fund the, in part, the new Mason County Shelter, which is now Crossroads Housing Facility up on Olympic Highway South. You've probably been watching that under construction for quite some time. And that project came together in part through a grant that the city received, and we were the recipient of that from the Community Development Block program by the State Department of Commerce. Mason County Shelter was a sub-recipient of the grant funding, and we were in charge of monitoring a number of activities related to that. So if we could roll ahead here. I should mention that I had concerns that we needed to provide a Spanish interpreter for this meeting. As you may be aware, in meetings past where we've discussed CDBG funding, we've had an interpreter present. I was in a quandary because we really couldn't find someone. I don't know if it was the Seahawk game or what was going on exactly, but we couldn't find a volunteer. So I called Commerce and said, look, I can't get an interpreter there. And they said, that's fine. It's not in your contract. You're not obligated to provide one. So we're home free here without an interpreter tonight, which will make it go faster for everybody. So if you could go to the next slide. This just has sort of the big pieces in it. I wanted to move through this in part. I didn't want to forget a name or an entity, so I'm just putting out a disclaimer. This isn't all the different team players. There was a lot of folks involved in this project, but among the highlights were, of course, the Department of Commerce, which awarded the city ultimately $1 million toward this project. Mason County Shelter, who was the funding recipient, they received a Housing Trust Fund grant of almost $3 million as well, and those two pots of money were the bulk of the funding for the project. The Housing Coalition received or granted them another $440,000, and there was a number of other smaller grantees and donations made. I'm not sure my math is exactly right, but it was right around $4.5 million in total. Of course, a key part of the project was Jody Miller Construction. They were the general contractor for the project. Next slide. The design team included Environmental Works and Foster & Williams. Hatton Godat Pantier provided the civil design, and project management for the shelter was provided by Common Ground, which was formerly called Bellwether Housing. And as I said, there was a number of other entities that we could list here that were part of it. Those were the main folks that were really meeting on a week-to-week basis once the project was under construction and we were moving forward. So I've got a few slides here that kind of shows progress along the way. So we can scroll through these a little bit here. This is early on. You see the building on the left is, I believe that is the, that's the shelter. They're doing some excavation there, and one thing this identifies is the soil conditions. You can look at that pile of soil there. It's pretty clay, pretty mucky. That was a significant problem in the construction of this project all the way out of the ground. But we were able to find ways to work through that and move forward. So if you go to the next slide, this is the framed version of that. It's well underway now. You can see there's a fair amount of site work there. Yeah, the next slide will show that's the shelter building now with the roof inside it. It's really moving along there. That's from the street, that's Sargentson, and the next slide is also Sargentson, but kind of looking at the end of the building going forward. There you go. So this is downhill, and yeah, to the right there is the construction of the apartment structure. So if you envision the site there, this is further down. Again, you can see it's pretty mucky, but they're getting the apartment building out of the ground there. So the next slide, I think, will be pretty telling. You can see the shelter building's moving along pretty well now. It's pretty much finished on the outside. They're doing a lot of interior work. And in the end of the picture, you can see the apartments building is now roofed. It has the siding on it, and they're moving along on that one as well. This was probably taken, I don't know, I'm going to say 6 or 8 months ago roughly. Next slide. You can see here, this is looking back across from the lower side. That's the completed shelter building in the background. The foreground here is the apartments. The railings are up, the stairs are in place. See the hydrant there, it's even landscaped. So the next slide, I believe, is I think the one interior shot I have here. Is that your office, Deb? That's Carol. That's an interior office space of the suite there, and it turned out really nice. I don't know if you had a chance to go through or take a look around. All in all, it turned out very nice. We got a lot of positive comments on the colors. That was someone else's responsibility. I'm glad it turned out pretty good. Next slide, I think this is the most recent slide. It shows the shelter building landscaping looking pretty good there, about wrapped up. So, so in conclusion here, I'll go over some of the elements of the grant. On the next slide, it shows some of the components that were what we were trying to achieve. These are the describes really in just very brief detail the elements of the improvements. There's 7 new studio units. There's 4 one-bedroom and 4 two-bedroom apartment units, as well as administrative offices. And in the course of the year, they served 172 clients. All of those were extremely low income, which equates to lower than 30% of the average median income. And the apartments serve a specific clientele that's very low income. That's under 50% average median income. So it's meeting a very needed element of our community in terms of providing housing. Next slide. And as part of the grant obligations, we had a whole cadre of things that we were tasked with, and this is again just some highlights, some bullets. We executed the contract with Commerce and our subrecipient. We had to work through a process to come up with a way to account for all the different elements that we needed to keep track of. We completed the environmental review for the project. When the project was bid, it met all of the bidding and award requirements, Bacon-Davis Act, all the way down. We had to work through internal processes to make sure that when payment requests had come in, that in a timely manner we would work through that approval process and get those checks back out. We had weekly meetings on site where we would discuss progress, we would discuss change orders, we would work through different issues, and as I said, the soil provided a whole host of those in itself. Along the way, we secured additional funding. The initial grant award was it $825,000? And there was more funding required in part because of these costs getting out of the ground that were just unforeseen. And we were able to, along the way, get a little extra money to help the project out there. Again, we ensured that the subcontractors were getting paid according to federal regulations. That required a lot of interviews out in the field to make sure that all of these requirements were being met. Made sure that civil rights were adhered to in the course of delivering the project. And we submitted, which I believe is in your packet, a piece of a closeout report, which demonstrates how we met all the grant obligations to the funder. So I think I got one more slide here. I wanted to thank a number of people here. We had a really good working team with the project, the designers and the contractors. Again, I'm reluctant again to naming all the names, but I really appreciate the time and the care that was given in making sure that project was delivered. Commerce staff was very helpful to us in terms of working through some of the grant issues. As you're aware, in the course of managing that grant, Dennis McDonald retired, and we lost Donnie. She moved on to a different job, so we were left with all the institutional knowledge of the inner workings of that grant out doing something else, and we had to find a way to finish it up and make it happen. Commerce staff was very helpful in walking us through some of those issues that we just didn't understand. Dennis was a great guy in terms of organizing that, so we had a file system that we could work with and could bring the project forward in. The Commerce staff, in fact, was very complimentary of the work that Dennis and Donnie did, and it really helped have a system that we could complete the project with. And I think we were also very fortunate that Susan Isham, who was working for Deb Nielsen at the shelter, came over to the city and helped us complete our work. Having that knowledge of the project was very valuable, and her work was very well appreciated. Final thanks, I think, is to you folks there. Without your decision to move this forward, this would have never happened, and the project probably wouldn't have been built. $1 million is a lot of gap to come up with. So that's all I have. I think Deb wanted to address the commission as well.
No, you don't have to sign in. This is your program. You can, yeah.
Hi. For the record, Deb Nielsen from Crossroads Housing, formerly Mason County Shelter. And I just want to thank, I'm looking around the room, I think I've talked to all of you in the course of this project at one level or another. Without the CDBG funding from the City of Shelton, this project would not have happened. It was kind, generous, thinking ahead on the part of the city on what this community is going to need. I'm thinking back over the course of the last 1,000 years, and I think we've always had people in poverty needing some place to live. And I don't see, looking forward 1,000 years, that we're going to completely eradicate that life issue. So it's something that the community needs, and government funding is what it is. It's a little more complicated than building a private home. And I think we all learned that through the process. But I think the City of Shelton, institutional knowledge, having gone through this, will give the city another opportunity. If this comes to the city, they'll have some background to move forward. And the community members who are not here, that number 173 is just the people we serve in that homeless shelter, but those administrative offices, we serve over 1,500 people a year in our tiny little organization who need our help in the community. And if you were ever at our old offices, they were less than functional. That was a politically correct way to say it, I think. So thank you, and here's my new phrase, thanks 4 million.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your comments. Well, at this time, I invite my fellow commissioners if they have anything to add to this.
Oh, I would just say that I have watched the buildings go up, and I went to the grand opening that you have there, and I have to say that every time I drive down that hill and see those beautiful buildings, it makes me really proud of our community and of the job that you've done with assistance, I know. And I think I agree that it speaks really well for our community, and you're doing a great job.
Take the village.
You know, I would just add, I lived nearby your former offices down there, and I always appreciated how well you ran it. You know, it was always not a problem for the community. There was very little issues down there for people in that need. That your staff was always real professional, and I'm glad you have a nice facility now to continue that work that's much needed. So, thanks.
And I would say, aside from the buildings, it did take leadership, and a lot of that is your leadership, because you were, I believe, the active ingredient to push it forward and move it forward. And we, in a lot of ways, we just kind of followed the dots. And I think that you did a great job in providing a service that we needed and that we'll need for many years to come. So we appreciate your involvement also in that. We thank you very much for coming out tonight, and thank you, Steve, for the presentation. At this time, we have, because it is a public hearing, if anyone from the public wants to speak, we have a opportunity for testimony. If not, there is no further action at this time required, so I will now like to close this public hearing. We are entering back into our regular City Commission meeting with our consent agenda. Thank you. Are we ready for the reading of the consent agenda?
Yes.
Could we please have a reading of the consent agenda?
Consent agenda, vouchers numbered 84218 through 84335 in the amount of $353,252.72. Commission meeting minutes of retreat of August 19th, 2014. Business meeting of September 15th, 2014. Study session of September 22nd, 2014. And study session of September 29th, 2014. Northcliffe Sewer Main Extension, capital capital project budget modification of $29,746.71, authorizing the city administrator to make the necessary modifications.
Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move we approve the consent agenda.
I second that motion.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The agenda passes. Next is a item of business under old business, and it's going to be presented again by Mr. Steve Goins, and it's going to be a memorandum of understanding between the city and the, of Shelton and the Mason County Transit Authority, Mason Transit Authority.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. We discussed this item a couple weeks ago. We've drafted a memorandum of understanding, which is included in your packet. In summary, nothing's really changed in the proposal. Our concept here was to coordinate some work with the Mason Transit folks that are improving the Armory building. Their off-site improvements include some frontage improvements as well as a rehabilitation of the eastbound lane on Franklin. The staff from both MTA and the city realized in the course of the discussion that it's likely that the bus traffic this new facility will generate is probably going to accelerate the deterioration of the roads in the vicinity, and we wanted to try to figure out a way to provide improvements that would address those needs and at the same time work cooperatively. What we arrived at was a concept where a portion of that work, specifically the rehabilitation of the eastbound lane, would be deferred as part of the initial project improvements while the city and MTA seek grant funding to do a more area-wide improvement. The area-wide improvement is illustrated on this exhibit here, which I believe your packet contained as well. We felt this was a real nice addition to the memorandum because it really gives you a visual of what we're trying to accomplish and why. You can see the routing that's shown there. That's predominantly how MTA envisions utilizing the downtown roads. Some of those roads are in pretty good shape. We just repaved First Street, for instance, and the section of railroad between 7th and 1st hasn't been resurfaced in a while, but that piece of road is holding up pretty well. But there's areas, especially on Franklin and 4th Street, that were a concern. So the illustration shows the area in yellow, which we anticipate would need to be rehabilitated as part of probably near-term work. The section that's in gray is also part of their main pattern of traffic there. But that section of road is in much better shape, particularly the section in front of the new fire station. Our thinking was that doesn't take rehabilitation. That might take some milling or some other...
What is milling? I saw that.
That would be where you have concrete panels that are no longer aligned because there's been shifting. Either one's subsided or one's lifted. And you would mill those edges so that the road has a more smooth transition as you're driving down it.
Thank you.
So in concept, what we agreed on was to defer that work. In the meantime, try to seek some grant opportunities, and with the purpose of doing this described rehabilitation in the downtown. If we're unsuccessful in landing the grant funding, at that time, MTA would complete the required improvements that would be on Franklin Street, and we have every reason to believe this. And transit for the city, but also the residents in the area, for the businesses that are in the streets. That certainly we've seen this at length. They the time. I know they wanted the attorney to take a look at it, and I did get back. Also,
There is a opportunity for public comment action on this, if anyone from the public. Yes, Mr. O'Leary.
I'd like to pay a compliment to our staff. Steve and Public Works worked on this together. And again, it's, and I'm going to work to point these things out. It started out as we're going to have Mason Transit fix half the street in front of their facility. and we had not been able to do the other half because we don't have the money. But by thinking more broadly and thinking about the whole transportation system in the downtown, the idea came back from staff, well, let's just expand the projects and go get grant dollars for it, and it's probably available. So we've taken something that would have been half a job and we turned it into a bigger job, and it's only due to their their creativity that brought it this about it. So it's a really good idea. So well done.
All right, questions, comments from the commissioners?
Well, I will second what Dave said, and it's really exciting, the potential for partnerships and for getting better jobs done by working together. And I know that that Mason Transit has voiced in the future maybe partnering on other projects, so I welcome the cooperation.
Steve, did their amount increase? I believe it was 40 grand at the last time I'd read that. Did they agree to that? Or is this the MOU we're going to send to them? And
well, this is a iteration of an iteration.
okay.
We initially agreed on a concept where we thought we needed roughly $1 million for this larger project. And we were trying to devise a equitable way to share that cost. And what we arrived at was the city would manage the project. There's a staff that manages the project. We would also looking for the grant funding. Our staffs had opportunity to find grants and that portion of the work. In turn, we felt that having MTA do a little more than half of the matching fund offset the cost for our staff to manage the project. So at the time, we were thinking we would pursue a Transportation Improvement Board grant, which has a 10% match. So following that math, we anticipated it was $1 million. And what we talked about at the staff level is having MTA come up with a little more of the capital contribute, probably more than that moved during our negotiations, in part because there was some misunderstandings of what the project consisted of or and how we arrived at that amount. And that was part of the reason I created this exhibit, so it was more clear that we didn't anticipate the project scope changing a lot. And we actually, I think it's in one of the sections here, if we decide that we can get more grant money, we can expand the project, that wouldn't change Mason Transit's commitment. Their commitment is capped at that $60,000. So that's how we arrived at that $60,000 initially. And I just went back to that when I created this version here. There was a couple elements in their drafts that we weren't able to support, and I believe we've ironed those out. And in part, it was not only putting a cap on the cost for their match, but what those improvements are. I think there was some concern at Mason Transit's world that 3 years is a long time to wait to see how this thing turns out. If we update our standards and now those improvements have changed and it's a different scope of work, what's that cost, and did that delay end up costing us money? And what we responded with was, no, your improvements are tied to the approved plans that you have, and that work is very specific. So that's not going to change. And I think they were comfortable with that.
So staff at MTA has has seen this draft.
They have seen this draft. I forwarded this last week. As I said, I
So-
haven't heard back any negative feedback, so I can't tell you they've supported it, but I can't tell you that they want changes either.
Right, it'll go before our board meeting.
That's what I believe would be probably the next step.
Yeah.
I think Brad was anticipating calling a special meeting because I think the timing of getting this through was a concern of theirs.
Yeah.
So we've been pushing hard to try to get this final language.
So as soon as we sign this and get it to them.
Then they can call a
then
meeting
they'll-
and
That's right. Okay, thanks.
Well, I think it's, a project of this magnitude warrants a full street in front of it. And we are always conscious of the amount of money that the city of Shelton has for things like this, and I do think this is the right way to go. And I think it's, it's just one more street that we won't have to pave next year or the year after. So I think paving these streets is important to this, to our ratepayers and the citizens of Shelton. So I would have no problem signing this and moving it forward. So at this time, I think we also have a little public comment period if anyone would like to speak about this. Seeing none, are we ready to, I guess I'm ready to request a motion.
Go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead.
I can't do it.
Okay,
It has to be one
I
of those two.
move, I move that we approve this proposal and enter this memorandum of understanding with Mason Transit Authority.
And I would second that. The only reason I hesitated was because of my connection with Mason Transit, that I abstain from the vote when we have it at the board meeting, so.
Okay, well, there's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? So that memorandum is passed. Okay, we have no new business at this time, and we are all prepared because the Seahawks game is slipping away from us to have a lengthy administration report.
This week I'm working on budget, as we talked about earlier. We had a support letter that went to Mason Transit today on a grant application that they were looking for, and Vicki helped put that together. We did that administratively rather than bringing it here because they were in kind of a hurry. So, anyhow.
All right. There is another general public comment period, but seeing that the last public left the building, we don't need to do that. Administration final touches? I will remind the public that I will be leaving on a family, it's turned into really a family emergency. Was started to be a vacation, but it'll be more of a family sickness problem. My wife's mother is quite ill in Fiji and will be leaving on the 22nd. I will be out of town for 2 weeks. There is the possibility of leaving earlier, but each day we have to make that decision. So I will be gone from October 22nd through November 5th. Our next meeting will be October 13th at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. This meeting is adjourned.
Oh, you said sorry that her mother's ill.
Quite bad. So, yeah.